What happens when you stop trying to fit in? Most of us spend years adapting to the people and environments around us. But there is a difference between adapting, hiding, and masking. And understanding that difference may change how you think about yourself, your workplace, and the people around you. In this episode, we'll discuss the hidden costs of fitting in, why some adaptations help us thrive while others lead to burnout, and what organizations lose when it's not safe to be yourself. Hi, I'm Dr. Theresa Haskins, and welcome to Think Differently, the podcast that challenges the status quo and explores the power of neurodiversity to create a more inclusive and accessible world. Together, we will talk about everything from the value of different perspectives to the limitless potential of human beings. We'll explore how embracing differences can lead to endless possibilities and how you can maximize strengths to make a positive impact on the world. So sit back, relax, and join me as we get ready to think differently. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Think Differently. Today, I want to talk about an awakening or realization that happens for many neurodivergent people and how all of us better understanding different ways we navigate life could really help all of us. I think there comes a moment in many people's lives when they stop trying so hard to fit in, not because they've become rebellious or that they've given up, and not because they suddenly stop caring what other people think. What I think happens is when they finally realize how much energy they've spent trying to become someone other people would find easier to accept, they just stop. And I don't think it usually comes from one incident or one conversation. I think it comes from an accumulation of moments and time that becomes a weight that builds slowly over and over again until something heavier than fatigue kicks in. It's not the kind of tired you feel after a long week at work. It's something that seeps beyond the mind and deep into your bones. Maybe you tried to share an idea, a good one, maybe a great one, and it was dismissed. And then you tried again and again. Or you made significant contributions. You thought you did everything right, yet you watched someone else get the recognition. Maybe even watch them get promoted on the back of your work. You cared what people thought because you believed their opinions were honest and that the outcomes would eventually match the output, but they didn't. And at some point, you realize that operating with integrity, meaning what you say, doing what you commit to do, is how you operate, not necessarily how everyone around you is also operating. You had been using your compass the whole time, believing you were all working from the same system. And then one day you just realize we're not. For some neurodivergent people, that realization comes much earlier than it does for others. Some of us were taught from a very young age to modify, to adjust, to make ourselves more palatable to the environments around us. And it often isn't until much later, when the stress from work, from relationships, from life and its fullness accumulates and pushes us toward burnout, that we begin to understand the real cost of what we've been doing. I wish I could point to a specific day or moment in time. I wish I could tell you that there was some dramatic turning point where you'll just stand up and declare I'm done. But that's not how it happened for me, and I suspect it's not how it happens for most other people either. So today, I actually want to talk about 3 things that we talk about often, but we conflate. And that conflation has real consequences for people and for organizations. And it's actually the concept of adapting, hiding, and masking. Often people will use these words interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. And I think it matters that we understand the differences between them. So let's start with adapting, because I want to be clear about something before we go any further in this conversation. I am not someone who believes that we should never adjust to our environments. I don't believe that. Adaptation is part of being human. If I go to a formal event, I dress accordingly. If I'm teaching undergraduate students, I communicate differently than I do when I'm speaking to a room full of senior executives. When I deliver a keynote, I'm not the same person as I am sitting around my coffee table chatting with close friends. That is adaptation. And in many professional environments, especially medicine, law, finance, academia, There are real expectations around conduct and communication styles. Learning those norms is part of entering those spaces. That is not oppression. That is the cost of entry. And most of us pay it without a second thought because we can. Because adapting, when it's genuine, when it's choice, doesn't require us to disappear as an individual. But then something else sometimes happens in other environments. And this is where I want you to stay with me. Sometimes people stop sharing ideas because they've learned those ideas won't be welcomed. They stop asking certain questions. They stop raising certain concerns. They stop offering the perspective that might actually change the outcomes in a good way because they've quietly, almost invisibly, learned that some perspectives make everyone uncomfortable. So they go quiet. They make themselves smaller. They take up less space. That's not adaptation anymore. That's hiding. And hiding is different from masking. Hiding is behavioral. It's a choice, sometimes a necessary one, to stay silent, to stay small, to not volunteer what you actually know or think or see. Organizations create hiding behavior in their people more than they realize. When candor is punished, even subtly, people learn not to speak up so much, and they learn to do that fast. And they adjust. Not because they're dishonest, but because they're reading the room, and the room has made itself clear. Don't bring all of yourself to the office. We only want the parts that fit our culture and narrative. So that is hiding. And many people, not just neurodivergents, do this. And it has negative impact on your sense of self over time and your overall mental well-being. Then that takes us to masking. And that goes even further. And this is where I want to speak specifically to the neurodivergent experience, because I think this is where the conversation usually stops short. Masking isn't staying quiet. It's not hiding. Masking is active. It is the sustained, real-time work of performing a version of yourself that the environment will accept, not just in how you dress or how you address people, but in how you appear to think, how you process information, how you move through the world. For some neurodivergent people, that means forcing eye contact that feels physically exhausting. It means rehearsing conversations over and over again before they actually happen. It means studying social interactions the way a person would study a new language. It means suppressing how you naturally communicate, how you naturally would respond, how you naturally exist in the world, because you've learned over years and years that the authentic version of how you navigate the world isn't welcome. That is not learning professional norms. That is learning how to disguise yourself. And the distinction matters enormously because one is sustainable and one is not. Here is what I want organizations to understand. When you create a culture that demands adaptation, you get functional employees, people who know the rules and follow them. That's not nothing, but it also has a ceiling. When you create a culture where people feel they have to hide, where certain voices go quiet because the environment has made it clear that certain voices are inconvenient, you lose something you may not even know you're losing. You lose the idea that didn't get raised, the concern that didn't get flagged, the pattern someone noticed but decided wasn't worth the risk to name. And when you create a culture where people are masking, where neurodivergent employees in particular are performing neurotypicality as a condition of participation, you get the performance without the person. You get the output without the true thinking behind it. You get a face without its full authenticity. And eventually, you lose both because masking at that level is not sustainable. It leads to burnout. And the people who burn out are often the very people you need most. I don't say any of this to assign blame. I say it because I think most organizations generally don't know this is happening. They see someone who appears successful, engaged, thriving, and they assume everything is fine. They don't see the energy it takes to maintain that appearance. They don't see what it really costs the individual. I also want to say something else because I think it really matters. I don't fault anyone for doing what they have to do to get by in this world. I've done it. Many of you have done it. And for all I know, there may be seasons in my own life where I have to do it again. That is the reality of needing to work, needing to provide, needing to survive inside systems that weren't always built with diversity in mind. There is no version of that reality that deserves judgment. Ages and stages are real. What you can afford to risk at 52 is different from what you can afford to risk at 27. The goal of this conversation is not to tell you that you should have spoken up sooner, or that staying was a failure, or that modifying yourself to stay employed was something to be ashamed of. It wasn't, it still isn't. There are things that should be different than they are in this world, but I am very aware of what it means to live in the reality of any situation. The goal here is to name what's actually happening, because I think when we can name it clearly, something shifts inside us in a good way. When you can look at your experience and say, I wasn't just adapting, I was hiding. Or I wasn't just adjusting, I was masking. Something becomes visible that was invisible before. And visibility is where change and healing starts. Not just for individuals, for organizations too. Because the real question isn't whether your employees have learned to fit in. The question is, what is the cost for them to do so? And whether the culture you've built is asking people to bring their capability or asking them to perform as you want to see it, rather than acknowledging the full human behind the facade. Those are very different things. And I think it's time we start treating them that way and calling it all what it is. Until next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Think Differently. I hope you found our discussion today insightful and thought-provoking. I want to thank AudioWorks Studios for their exceptional production and recording support. Without their expertise and dedication, this podcast would not be possible. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to share it with others. Your support helps us to reach new audiences and promote neurodiversity in our world. Also, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite platform so that you can stay up to date on the latest episodes. We look forward to seeing you again soon on Think Differently.